All of this data is locked in the hands of your data scientists and data engineers. In this session, we will show you a great new way of unlocking that insight and getting more of that data in the hands of your regular, non-technical business users. My name is Tarek. I'm the Director of Product. This is Andre. He's a staff software engineer at Databricks. We're going to talk to you about Databricks apps. Well, let me start with a story. We all have Sarah, the hotshot VP of sales in the organization. She speaks Excel, she speaks email, she speaks anything in a browser, but doesn't necessarily know how to interact with a ton of data outside of Excel. In your organization, you have all your data stored somewhere in the cloud, or a combination of things in the cloud and things in other places. And Sarah still needs to be able to get insight, that valuable insight we were talking about, into her sales by region, by area, get forecasts into what those sales are going to be in the future. And she can do some of that in Excel, but not everything. On the other side in the organization, we have Dan, the data scientist. And Dan knows how to speak data, is familiar with a number of programming languages, works with Databricks and other tools, and can get that valuable insight from the data. And a lot of our jobs is connecting Dan with Sarah and others in the organization that need that kind of insight. So how do we make it happen? How many have a similar story happening in their company? Okay, you're in the right place. Good. How many identify more as a Dan? How many are a Sarah? Are you afraid? One person did. Okay. I'm going to be talking about you for the rest of the talk. So how does Dan do it today? Dan uses a combination of notebooks, queries, dashboards, and a whole set of other tools to be able to do that. In a notebook, Dan is able to go and use his favorite programming language. He can use Python, he can use SQL, he can do lots of massive processing on the data, access the AI models that they have, and otherwise be able to get to the piece of insight that he wants to share with Sarah. Notebooks are not a great way of sharing data with Sarah. I think if Dan shared the notebook with Sarah, some problems may happen. We wouldn't want that. So Dan typically would, I don't know, take a screenshot, send something to Sarah, maybe even create a dashboard. Get a dashboard, maybe write some SQL queries and have a nice dashboard that he would create for Sarah's and other people that are trying to do that. And dashboards are great because dashboards are kind of mostly accessible to people, in the outside world. They can, click on a link in a browser and be able to see that. It can give them nice visualizations. Some people can make, dashboards sing and dance. They have all these filters in the dashboards and really nice and interactive dashboards, which is great if you know exactly the questions that are being asked and the interactions are somewhat, limited to what you would expect a user would want. That's okay. These are good. So this kind of can work in a situation where, say, for example, you want to see the sales of the past few quarters. But what if the assignment was a little bit harder for Dan? And Sarah wanted to do some complex what-if analysis that involves a very detailed, interactive thing that needs to happen. And clicking on filters and subsets of the data and imaginary results that show up from the right and overlays and interesting things like that. That's not as easy to do in a dashboard. If the colleagues on the production team wanted to actually visualize the physical product that they have and overlay the data on the physical product. Good luck doing that in a dashboard. That's going to be pretty complicated. If you want to actually interact with the data, not just look at it, but also consolidate data, write to data, you need kind of a different thing that allows you to do that kind of stuff with the data. So notebooks and dashboards are not always the answer. Sometimes you just need something more. And that's something more that Dan needs is actually write an app. They want to write an app for the user that can speak to them in the language they understand, that shows the right content that they want to see, and the interaction model that that user expects. Further, they want to be able to share that application with lots of different people that may or may not have access to the underlying platform like Databricks. And they want them to be able to just use those apps on their computers, on their PCs. So how does Dan do that? Well, Dan can write apps. I mean, luckily, Dan knows how to write code. They can use Python, they can use other tools. There are lots of frameworks that they can use for writing apps. But what is also hard is Dan now needs to worry about how to deploy that application, where to deploy that application, dealing with app service, dealing with containers. And that's, Dan doesn't want to play IT infrastructure guy in the afternoon. Dan just wants to write the code for the application. Also, sharing the application is not as easy as it seems. You don't just send a link to somebody. What if that somebody sends that link to somebody else and that somebody else is not supposed to access the applications? You need to control how these applications are shared. And he needs to manage that control somewhere. And it would be nice to be able to do that from the place that you normally are accessing, permissions for data. Maybe you get to set permissions for these applications as well. But then that becomes another job of Dan having to deal with single sign-on and OAuth and different authentication methods and all of that stuff. That's complexity. Your IT team probably has a say about who gets to access the data in the applications. Maybe they set a rule where certain IPs are the only ones that can access data in your company. Well, now Dan has to take that into consideration as well, or they risk that IT is unhappy with their application. If they are unhappy, there's probably a good thing to be said about taking that app down. So Dan now has to deal with hosting, sharing, securing the application. And those are hard problems that are even harder for Dan than just writing the code for the application. So what do? Well, that's where custom apps come in, and we would like to introduce Databricks custom applications. And it is the simplest way for data scientists and data engineers to create applications that are secure and governed and easy to deploy on Databricks. With custom apps, you just write code for your application, and you ask Databricks to host it. By running the application, Databricks takes care of all the underlying IT infrastructure. More importantly, that infrastructure lives by the same IT security rules that you already set for your workspace, that you've already been managing for your data, that your IT team has already approved and agreed on. You can also specify who exactly gets to see that data. Further, not only who gets to see that data on those applications, but also respect the same rules that you already have for accessing the data. And you can choose to limit who gets to see the application based and the contents of the application based on what their credentials actually allow them. Or you can choose to do more than that. You get a lot of choices, but it's easy to do. Instead of me showing you more and talking to you more about it, I think it's best if you actually see it in action. So Andre, why don't you show us a demo of how this apps thing is supposed to work?
Yep, I will. Okay, good morning, everyone. Let's code up some apps. I'm gonna go live this time. Let's see what's gonna happen. But most of you are an engineer or data scientists, so you know one of the main skills that we have is copy and paste. So I went to this Gradio thing. What is happening right now is that there's a lot of very cool frameworks for building web applications in Python. One of them is Gradio. I'm not advertising to use Gradio. Anything works. Streamlit works. Flask works. You can write HTML, CSS. We don't care. But I found this one. I was talking to someone here in the audience yesterday about maps, and there's this little code here that I wanted to copy and paste. So if I get this, all that I need to do is create a Python file, paste the code, save. In here, my setup is very simple. I have my virtual environment, I have my database config, and I have a VS Code extension for Databricks that is automatically syncing my code to the workspace. So if I go to my workspace, I should very theoretically see something appear in here. So my source code is in the workspace right now. That's great. So back to, but we don't write codes in, like, apps are a little bit more complicated to write, and I think I at least prefer using a proper IDE. So let's use this. So the first thing is look at this code and say, oh, there's from datasets. Probably need to install that. So the other thing I need to do is put a requirements.txt and say datasets. Perfect. And then go to my terminal. Databricks, apps, create, Data Summit, demo. Poof. So when I'm creating an app, what do? We're provisioning URL. We are setting up a service principal. We are setting up OAuth and SSO for you. So at the end of this, like, we have everything that the app needs to run, except from the actual compute. But you have all the identity of the app and the URL that's out there. The next thing I'm going to do is just Databricks, apps, deploy. What I call this, data, and I Summit demo. And what I need is I need to know what's the folder here, right? I just need to copy this path, put it in there, and go for it. So what we're doing right now is that we're actually starting a compute specifically for that app. So everything is sandboxed, and one app doesn't have access to the other. It's a small VM that is specific for this, which means to be cheap and for the app. That should take a couple minutes. A note, it should take a couple minutes, and there is no way to be slower than this because we're actually going and provisioning the VM for you. So it's only going to get faster. But in the meantime, let's change this. This is not very fun because I'm reading from a CSV file from a dataset. That's not how apps should be in Databricks. I just happen to have that same data set in Databricks. Look at that. Let's import this. That's great. So now let's make this app actually query this data. You can see some sample data, ID, name, neighborhood, latitude, longitude, room type, all that. So our app now needs to query that. Okay, so to query this, what do I need? Simple. Let's do that. From Databricks, import SDK, SQL. Probably don't need any of that, don't need any of that. I probably need a function that says query. And that function that says query probably returns a data frame. But let's code up some stuff. How do you connect to Databricks? So the first thing is that we automatically inject all the information that you need for the service principal of this app in your container. Which means that you can literally just say config is equal sdk.config.config, and that is all the authentication that you need for your app. The same thing, if you have the Databricks config and everything set up in your local development, it should work. A very important part of apps is that if it runs in your local machine, it should run in Databricks. Very important for me to make that work, because you don't want to be debugging things inside Databricks, SSH and all that stuff. You want to debug in your local machine. although I will show you how to debug and see the logs too. So that's it. I got a config. So now with SQL.connect, what the connect needs, not that, not second skill that we are learning how to see bullshit of the Copilot. So that's not the way it works. Server host name is equal config.host, because also the host is injected in a container. You don't need to know, and you should have that in your Databricks config file. The other thing is an HTTP path. That we will keep it empty right now, and I'll grab soon. And there's a thing called service credential provider. Everything that the app does with Databricks is using OAuth, which means that it's only short-lived tokens, and you decide how long those tokens live for. Which also means that you need to code in a way that you don't assume that that token is going to be alive during everything. So this credential provider, that's what it does. It refreshes the token automatically for you. So it's very simple. I just say lambda config.authenticate. Authenticate returns headers with a bearer token. That's pretty much it. Okay, as connect with, this one was right. Connect the cursor as cursor. Yep, I think that's it. I just want this a little bit easier. I want this fetch arrow because that one has a 2pandas API, and that's exactly what I need. And then I just return data. Cool. I want to do that here. That is there. Okay, so now a couple of things we need to fix. HTTP path, let's grab an HTTP path. We go to SQL Warehouse, there's one here. Put it there, cool. And then I need to grab my table. What's my table name? This guy, right? So under it, blah, blah, blah. Cool. Do not do this in production. Select star from a random table. Not that good. Okay, this is a demo. Okay, so in the meantime, oh yeah, I forgot to look down here. Look at that. App deployed, process is running. Cool. I'm just gonna click in this link. And okay, I didn't save my file yet, but if I go and open this, that app that we copy and paste from the internet is running in Databricks. This is its own thing, has its own URL. But this is not very hard to do. What's hard to do, and what I spend the most time on, is honoring IP access lists, private links, end-to-end encryption, all the stuff that you argue with IT about. Everything's there. The same infrastructure, the same security boundaries that your workspace has, now your app has as well. Now the cool thing is that you have all the pixels in the screen. So you have, this URL is all yours. Like you can do whatever, now you can share your app with your URL. And I can show you, you get SSO by default. So you have to actually log into Databricks and do whatever IDP you have. So that's like very impressive to get it done. And as you saw now in, 10 minutes, it didn't even take 10 minutes. We got an app and deployed and everything done. Cool, but again, this is not very fun. This works, you have that, but the data is CSV. Let's query this and stuff. Okay, so back to my IDE. So I have a query, so let's go back here to the code. I have a query, a config authentication, connect to SQL, I have my warehouse, I select my table, 222, return data, and I think the only thing missing here is somehow I need to have this. Oh, look at that, it's actually right. So, okay, so I saved this. Nice. Again, this should have been updated in my workspace. yeah, my code is updated in the workspace automatically. And let's see what happens here. I'm going to redeploy this app with my changes. Redeploy, prepare source code, code's deployed. Didn't seem like much, but actually updated. And I think the way to prove that, we have a special little path here called log with a Z, and I'm from Canada, so I say Z. And this is piping live your standard out and standard error for you. So you can see that the first time you got this code, installed these requirements, started your app with, oh, is this too small? Let me increase this. Started your app with Python app. These are all the environment variables that we load for you automatically so things work from scratch. And the reason why it works is that Gradio, Streamlit, UV-Corn, all of those things are already set up for you. It's running there. Now the second deployment, got the code again. And you can see that the code here is in a special path. So in this case, I'm using a mode for deployment called snapshot. So I'm actually grabbing the code, saving where the service principal folder is. So if you go and change your code, you know exactly what got deployed. Because it's sometimes if you have things that live, you don't know what's in the server versus what's in the workspace. In this case, there's no problem about that. But I guess I'm gonna have to prove that this thing is actually occurring, right? So if I go refresh, got an error. Why did you get an error? Error request to the server. So my code is there. It's failing something, right? And that's like, outside from the keynote, there was an error too, right? But in here, like, writing code, the number of times that you're gonna have to go and do this. So I really wanted to demo things breaking. So I'm not, and it's very important, like now it's breaking, that's great. But you got all the errors, that's fine. So now let's try to fix it, right? What did I do wrong? Got that, oh, I think I should have done this. Okay, so deploy again. Deploy source code, deployed. The app is starting again. You see it's updating live. Now your app is started. If I go and refresh, there it is. And now we just went through the process of deploying an app, connected to Databricks, with the service principal authentication and OAuth, found an error, debugged it, fixed it, and deployed again, all that fast. Cool. So now what's next, right? Like, what's next is that we likely do not want to run an app in production just saying demo.launch and using Python. Most likely you're going to use some sort of process manager like GUnicore, UV-Corn, or something like that, right? Just running Python app.py is a demo, but it's not a real thing. So let's do the real thing. Again, let's use our first important skill and go copy some code. Gradio, for some reason, has a way to import, mount fast API. So let's do that. So if I copy this and put it in there, cool. And I copy that, put it at the bottom. And I think this is called IO now. And I want this to be the normal path. Where is that? I think that's called IO. Cool. Okay, so I think what's happening now is that Gradio is just rendering thing, and Fast API is the one that is actually managing the paths. That's great. But how do I tell Lakehouse apps to Databricks apps to actually run this thing the right way? Before I forget, there's another thing that's very important for app development is that your source code cannot depend on a specific workspace directly, because you're probably going to develop in one workspace and then deploy in a different workspace. So this thing about like just hard coding an HTTP path from a warehouse is actually not good. So let's change that. We have this special thing called app.yaml. I don't know if you heard about YAML files, but they're everywhere nowadays. There are two things that you can put inside this app.yaml. One is called a command, the other one is called an environment. Ooh, look at that. That was crazy. Don't want that though. Okay, so I want to run this with uvicorn, app.py. Yeah, I don't need that. I actually want to set workers. Yeah. So now what I'm saying is I'm run my app using this command. And I'm going to find an environment variable for this app. And that's going to be the MySQL warehouse here, the my HTTP path. So I'm just going to call this HTTP path. And where's my HTTP path here? Jesus Christ. That. Cool. Uvicorn, is that the right? Anyone? Shout if you see something wrong. Should work. And then here, I was going to do os.getinf. HTTP path. Go, and I think I need to import OS somewhere here. Cool, so what I did here, I'm using a proper process manager. So if your app crashes on a request, your whole app is not gonna crash now. And I'm using an environment variable to connect to not make my source code rely on the resource in the workspace. What do? I deploy again, to prepare source code, downloading source code, deploying. Done. Let's go see the logs, like seeing the logs. Okay, so requirements have not changed, it's skipping. Now I'm running uvicorn app, blah, blah, blah. I'm starting with this, so now I can see that I have one new environment variable being loaded in my app, and uvicorn is running and started, and I should be able to just go to the app, refresh this page, and the app is still there, running. Okay, that's cool. But the app is still using the service principal. And sometimes that is very what you want, because the end users don't really have authorization on the data. But other times, you really want the end user authentication to be on the app, right? So let's do that. I think in Flask there's a thing called, Gradio has a thing called requests. Request, and as a type, gradio.request. And if I pass this over to my query, I can get headers. So let's get a few things. I'm gonna get an email is equal request dot headers. Is it headers? Get headers? Let me check my notes. Request dot headers. We forward a few things for the app all the time. Based on the OIDC server and the ID provider, we get the preferred username, the email, and the user ID for it for you. And then also real IP and a few things if you really need that. So in this case, I'm going to do X forwarded user email. Let me just check my docs. Yeah, those are the things that we forward. Forwarded user, forwarded email, preferred username, and access token. So let's change that. Forwarded email. The other thing is the user actual token. This is an OAuth token that was done at the very beginning. So by default, the app doesn't have anything injected. Everything is OAuth. So if you want to get, let's get the X forwarded access token. Well, that was smart. So if I want to authenticate with the end user, all I need to do now is just say access token is equal token. And just so we know that this is working, let's print some stuff. Print email. Cool. Plug in. Done. Let's see what happened here. Things are important. That's all good. Now if I go and make a request, headers is not a callable. See, cool. Let's change this. Request dot what? Headers dot get. I asked to shout if I did something wrong. Look, it's deploying. There it is. Cool. So, like I said, that's my email printed there. And now the app is actually using the end user authentication. What is cool about this is that normally in Databricks or in other authentication models like a notebook is like, here's my laptop, go run it. That's the authentication model. In the app, it's a bit more complicated because you have, for example, an app, you're uploading files in an app. The file uploaded where you're going to put in a volume is not of any end user's business. That is owned by the app. So you should use the service principal to do that upload to Databricks. But if you query some very sensitive data, you are actually using the end user information authentication. So you actually use that. It's up to you to decide what's the best authentication model to use. And going from URL to user authentication in the data store is not that simple. I don't know, like, try to do that in Azure. And that is pretty much it. Now, of course, now I just did, let's show off a little bit more. We're just starting to put, we started to add this UI here for apps at the end. I have a bunch of apps. Where are my apps? I want to create an app. If I create an app and say, Data AI Summit chatbot, put a nice description. Another thing that we're working on is that most likely you're going to end up in a case where there's a lot of the same use cases in different apps. So you kind of start from a skeleton. Very rarely you're going to write code and get everyone to write code from scratch. So you can say some types of apps you already have a skeleton. And even more than that, you might have some certain templates that you want to use. The app needs to look like that or look like this. So we're working on ways for you to add templates. In this case, I have a single one. But you define and create a template, define where you want to save. That's great. Get rid of this. This is staging environment, so create. This is going to import a template. Template is in the GitHub repository, so you can save everything in the GitHub repository, get your templates in there, appeared in Databricks, you configure that for you. And got this, I'm going to deploy, and here have a couple of options, but I deploy. Like in the first time, it takes a couple minutes to deploy, app starting compute. If I go to my other app there, on my apps, there's demo. You show that in here all the information about that app, deployed, where's the source code, blah, blah, blah. And let me just show you a couple of the other apps that we have so you can know that it's actually real. So this is a chatbot with DBRX. If I go to the URL, little chatbot, add something, return. This is like 20 lines of code of asking model serving endpoints in Databricks how to do things. It's very simple. The other one is, everyone loves Streamlit. Let's show some Streamlit app. It's all here. So in this case, I have Streamlit running. It's querying some stuff. It's putting my user information in there. This Streamlit app I also have querying for both. You see, in this case, I did not grant permission to the service principal of the app for the data, so the data is not available. I have an app my own user has access to. So that's Streamlit for you. There's Dash. Is it done? Am I time off? There's Dash. I think you believe me now. It works. And that's it for the demo.
That's pretty cool. Thank you, Andre. It's awesome to be able to see how you can easily develop one of those applications. It's been about 20 minutes or so, and you went from copying code from the internet to running it in the context of Databricks, seeing it running, actually making it go to production. The nice thing about being able to develop these applications in Databricks is that you can basically use Python, you can use your choice of framework. You like Gradio, fine, you like Streamlit, okay. You want to use Dash, fine. Whatever framework you want to use, you're pretty open into the choice that you have. There's really no magic that is happening behind the scenes. Like Andre said, what you're developing on your local machine is what's going to end up running in the container in the cloud. You can debug it on your local machine. That really simplifies things. You can use the editor of your choice. You want to use notebooks, you can. You want to use Visual Studio Code, you can. You want to use any IDE that you want, you can. All of these are gonna work. Basically, use your own environment and your choice. You have a CLI that's working for you. Most importantly is the built-in security. And I think that really is where it all shines, is that not having to deal with that heavy lifting of the infrastructure, act as an IT person, have it respect all the rules that you've already put in your workspace, and the ability to just automatically authenticate into those applications. Now apply the rules based on the user that actually authenticated and be compliant with all the IT policy is fantastic. Having end-to-end decryption of anything that is being sent outside the application just really simplifies things. And when you see where the apps are running, basically those are running all inside Databricks, inside the Databricks serverless compute, managed by Databricks, so you don't have to manage containers or deal with containers or even know what is happening or running under the scenes. You just get a URL, you send it to people, and as long as they have the right security, they're gonna get in. Governance and access is very important. We showed you how to share that data. You can literally pick the names of the people that you can go and share it with, pick emails, you wanna share it with people, non-technical users, people outside Databricks, that's good. All of that working again with the single sign-on and the application itself now being able to go and act either as its own application, fetch the data as the application service principal, or it can go fetch the data or interact with other assets in Databricks as the actual user. Your choice. You can mix and match or do one or the other. You really get all of that control. And finally, as somebody that is developing applications not just by yourself, but with a team, all the team practices that you have, you can use with creating applications as well. You can use Git, you can use CI/CD, you can use Databricks asset bundles that we've launched recently that help you organize all of that and manage deployment between different environments. All of that kind of comes with. When can you get your hands on this? Right now, apps is in private preview. We have a good number of customers working with us in private preview. We have a few open spots, so if somebody's interested in joining the private preview, talk to us after the talk. We're happy to add you kind of based on what your needs are. Later this summer is when everybody else gets it. So as a public preview later in the summer, you should be able to try apps by yourself if you're not part of the private preview. And our goal is to get this into general availability for everyone by the end of the year. If you would like to learn more, reach out to Andre or Nick on our team. They are really the custodians of Lakehouse applications in Databricks. If you have any feedback you want to send us, or if you want to join the private preview, feel free to do that. This QR code here can get you directly into the, sign up for the private preview if you want to do that. And that was it. We are right on time, so thank you so much. Really appreciate you showing up. And we hope you enjoy the rest of your conference.